What's up, Badger fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Badgers as we continue chucking through this 2024 loaded recruiting class for the Badgers. We're heading in-state for the next one. In-state linebacker Landon Gauthier, Bayport, Wisconsin, 6'4", 220, consensus 3-star across the board. He just feels like one of a trillion Wisconsin in-state kids who got a little overlooked and a little slept on. And with players like this, the offer list, the ranking list, it never quite seems to materialize, but really good football player, great frame. Like, I gotta be honest, when he first committed, I I didn't hate it, but I was like, I don't know. The more you watch him, the more he kind of grows on you. Let's get into the three things we like about it. The first one is he's really instinctive, like really, really instinctive. And we watch him between the tackles, reading blocks, reading keys, reading assignments. He does an incredible job of sifting through the trash, finding the angle, hitting the ball carrier. He's not fooled. He is really a really instinctive middle linebacker with enough size and power to pop people. Like, he hits people, they go backwards with the frame to back it up. So when you combine an inside linebacker, a linebacker that has the 6'4", 220-pound frame with athletic ability and the instincts to find the right gap, to find the right fill, to meet, and the physicality to meet blockers at the point of attack and just shock them, just stun them, like gum everything up down there. It's really, really interesting between the tackles type of ability from a run defense perspective. Next thing I like about him is just versatility. There's a couple prospects in this class that have talked specifically about the versatility. Gauthier is another one of those. I mean, he drops back in hook coverage. You can see him in some man coverage on film, going sideline to sideline on film, blitzing, dumbing up running attacks, being a special teams demon. You see that as well. And I've talked about my affinity for guys who will play all over the field, right? Players who will kick coverage, punt coverage, whatever I need to do to win. There's a clip where he kicks the ball off. He's the kicker on a kickoff unit, goes down there and is the first guy down there to blast a guy. Like, it's ridiculous. And sometimes when you see stuff like that, like, you can't measure that. Like, that's not a star rating thing. That's just like a give a crap factor. And it's the same type of thing that a guy like Chris Borland had, right? You saw him kick an extra point and then rush the passer. And like, Gauthier's got just a tick of that in his game where he's all over the field and playing on multiple facets of the game. I think that speaks to just the desire to win, the competitiveness, the intangibles being wired the right way. Because if you're the star player on a team, you're heading to Wisconsin, you don't have to run down on kick coverage, with reckless abandon. It takes a certain type of kid and a certain type of player to do that. That bodes really well, in my opinion, because you got to be wired a certain way to play middle linebacker in the Big Ten. I think Gauthier is wired that way. The last thing I like is again, I talked about with Jensen too. Like, I have affinity for in-state kids, especially of this type, right? That athletic, kind of under-recruited linebacker. This just feels like another Wisconsin steal in a recruiting class, right? This feels like a guy in 3 years they're going to be like, I wonder why he only had Miami or Minnesota, Syracuse, and Stanford offers. I think he had a couple more. And Stanford, obviously, Bobby April going from Wisconsin out to the West Coast. That makes sense. But I like him a lot. And here's another one. Just to throw this on top of that, if Bobby April likes you at linebacker, I typically like you at linebacker. That dude knows what he looks for. That dude knows what it takes to be a successful linebacker in college football. Let's put the film up. This film is fun. I like this prospect a lot. I'm very intrigued. Again, he's bigger and more athletic than given credit for, which, does that sound familiar for Wisconsin in-state recruits? Yeah. It's the same thing. And not just even in-state recruits, Wisconsin linebackers. You remember the rap on all these guys. Sanborn, Edwards, Connolly, Sitchie. I don't know if they're athletic enough. All those dudes are in the NFL. Like, all those dudes made it to the NFL. Like, yeah, they're athletic enough. Gauthier could follow that type of path. Let's put the film up. Again, this is a fun one. Let me go back to the beginning here. Landon Gauthier. This is the first 7 games of his senior season. Again, not a big offer. This is what I'm talking about. Watch him blow this kick coverage unit up. Like, what? He destroys 3 people. They're like bowling pins. That's just a level of carnage that you need from an inside linebacker. And that's what he is. He's an inside linebacker who can drop back in zones. Here he's dropping back in the zone. He's going to pull off, read and react, find the crosser, and then make the pick. That's very TJ Edwards-ish, right? Pulling back in coverage, making a play with the hands, reading the crosser. And again, this is what I talked about between the tackles, just stoning the pulling guard, right? Stoning the guard, making the tackle. That's where, in my opinion, he's at his best. Between the tackles, sifting through coverage, making big hits, punishing ball carriers. Getting covering kicks here. Like he's a maniac. If this dude was coming down on kick coverage, I'm just fair catching every time. Like that dude's in the IR tomorrow. That dude's not playing football anymore. I like the ability as a blitzer, great motor, which shouldn't surprise you from somebody who plays special teams and everywhere on the field. He's a guy who gets after it, has the ability to impact the game as a blitzer. Here he's lined up on the out tackle, just gets leverage and explosion. The tackle has no real chance there. Now, level of competition is going to have to tick up a little bit. I'm going to be really interested to see what he looks like 2 years into the strength and conditioning program. This could be a 6'4", 235, 240-pound kid who has a great vision for the game, really understands where to go, understands run fits, and has competitive and physical like intensity. That's a recipe for a really good middle linebacker in the Big Ten. Here we are kicking the ball off, right? And I think he's also going to be the guy, if I remember this correctly, to come down and just rock the guy. Like that's unusual, right? I know it's at the high school level, but understand that's an unusual level of competitiveness and intangible toughness to kick the ball off and be the guy down there to rock the ball carrier. So that's what the Badgers are getting. I think the intangibles here are off the charts. I also like the physicality. I don't think it's top of the chart, athleticism, physicality, but it's good enough. And I think he can play pass, he can play run. You see clips of both of them. You see clips of him in zone, in man coverage, coming between the tackles, clips as a blitzer. I like him a lot. It's a fun prospect to watch. Good size frame, good athleticism. And again, it's those in-state players that typically have made the backbone of these really good Badger defenses. And I wouldn't bet against Landon in that respect. So we're going to kick it over to John Garcia Jr. to talk more about Landon Gauthier.
Landon Gauthier, in-state Gauthier, I think is the pronunciation. In-state linebacker. Another one with a good frame, projectable. What'd you see when you're watching Landon on film?
Just the comfort in space. I mean, this is, you talk about modern. You know, this kid, Landon, works outside in on almost every sample we get from him on Friday nights. And he does so as a dual threat. And what I mean by that is he does it really well against the run, as you would probably expect a stockier, physical player to do. But he also does so against the pass. And that is where it should hit another level for Wisconsin fans, because if you can work well in space and run and close, that's fun and good, and it'll help you against the run and the short passing game that has become prevalent throughout the sport. But if you could also work in true coverage, and there are some samples of him knocking footballs down 40 yards down the field, now you present true 3-down value and true assimilation into the modern game. We just talked about it with the other commitment of, hey, maybe he can do this in space and help out against tight ends and go from there. Well, now this is a player in Gauthier who, you know, in space can absolutely wall off a slot receiver, can absolutely contend with a running back as a receiver, you know, and maybe one that could help you in a zone scheme on top of it. So that is where you get enhanced value with this kid. But against the run, very physical, leverage-based player, can set the edge, excellent at hand utilization to get off of blocks, just navigates the field really well, and has some pop. You know, there's some short area explosion here within his game, but really comfortable in space, working outside in, which is, it just screams modern will linebacker, a guy you can use on every down at different depths, even with real comfort on top of it. So not the flashiest get, not the freaky athletic testing numbers and all that stuff that might come elsewhere. So he won't be as talked about, but that comfort in space is really invaluable in this day and age, because you're going to combat Phil Longo type offenses that want to go fast and they want to go wide. So this is the perfect complement to some of the bigger, you know, more conventional players that Wisconsin already had on its roster and that it continues to bring in.
Yeah, I thought whoever cut up his highlight film did a great job too. Because like the first clip, he's dipping his shoulder pass rush. The second clip, he's in coverage. The third clip, he's stacking and tackling, extending a play, and you really see the whole package there. I talked about a parallel between these two. I want to kind of talk to you about the direction defensive coordinator Mike Tressel, Luke Fickell are potentially going with this. They played a lot of a 3-3-5 at Cincinnati, where you have kind of more space, and it feels like both of these linebackers, and you hit on it, are versatile. You know, they can do a lot of different things. That feels like the mold they're going towards with this defense.
And they both take on blocks so well. They can both set the edge. In theory, these could be, you know, your edge setters on either side of the line, just one from depth and one maybe a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, that is so important in any scheme, but especially in the 3-3-5. You're asking your guys to just do more, because you're dedicating so much personnel to the back end that your front six in this case really have to do more and occupy to the point where it's not a weakness. Because you used to play Madden or NCAA on PlayStation, and it's like, oh, West Virginia's running the 3-3-5, we're gonna run it right at them, right? So that's the expectation, because there's just less bodies dedicated to stopping it. So that means each guy has to do a little bit more. So if you can play in space and also set the edge, it brings more value. Or in Thomas's case, if you could rush the passer and set the edge, it brings more value. Or play in space just a little bit as well, it just brings more value on the front end of that. And these guys are already showing that as juniors in high school, which is really encouraging, because you hope to enhance that ability at the next level. It's not always about how do you round out your game, what do you add to the arsenal, can you strengthen a strength and really make that your calling card on Saturdays where it matters most. I think if that happens with either of these two guys, they're going to get in the rotation sooner rather than later.
One of the things I talked about with Landon specifically, like it feels like every other recruit in this class, and John, we talked about everyone. We talked about Matt Toyer, the two tight ends, Steck and Booker. We talked about Heiberger. We talked about Jensen. They all feel like kind of obvious gets to me. I mean, they're great wins, but they're players you watch on film. The measurables are there for really all of them, and you're like, yes. This one feels like the first player in this class the staff has gone out, not a big offer list yet, doesn't have the elite athletic measurables necessarily. It's like their first real evaluation, maybe against the grain. The track record for Fickell, for Tressel, for developing, for finding, I feel like that should make Badger fans feel pretty comfortable when they go out there and pluck a guy that doesn't have a big offer list.
Yeah, let's trust the evaluation. And look, Landon's in state too. We keep talking about how loaded the state is and how rare that is. If you're going to miss, you miss on one of two things. You either miss on the measurables. Look, you miss on a guy who's just freaky athletic and just never figured it out. Fine. Nobody's going to fault you for that. But if you miss in another direction, let's miss on a high floor player within state lines that could push a pipeline. And that's exactly what Landon provides coming out of Green Bay. So I do think that that's a safe bet. And if there was worry from an evaluation standpoint, this green light doesn't come in April. It comes in December or January. And you're like, oh, we got an extra spot. Let's throw the in-stater a bone. This is not that. This is, 7, 8, 9 months ahead of time, taking an in-stater you feel good about from an evaluation standpoint. It's almost let's grab him before he blows up. So where it doesn't become a situation where, man, now we can't keep this guy home. But look, Stanford was in there. Ivy League schools were in there. So, again, we talk about high floor players. If you got that sort of cerebral track record to verify on the other side from an IQ and intelligence standpoint, you like that too. Again, if there's nothing wrong with a high floor guy. So I do like this take. And I do like the staff trusting its gut. You have to do it. You can't look around in today's college football. You'll be left behind. To have that within state lines on top of it, to me, is more the reason to take him this early. Take him off the market. Take him off the board. Don't let anyone else come in and move on from there.
And last one here on Landon, and this is something that I love when I watch film of a star high school player, and he's on special teams. He's covering kicks. He also plays fullback. He
plays
man
down there on kicks.
First man down there, right? I know that's not the be-all, end-all, but it feels like there's some intangible quality to players who are willing to just do that at every phase of football in the high school level.
Yeah, look, special teams is the desire phase of football, right? You just have to want it. So if you're seeing that on Friday nights from the best player on your roster, it does say a lot, because no school would say, hey, you've got to do this. Now, the best require it at the collegiate level, but you don't see that in high school. It's not something that you're asked to do and work 3 phases like people did in the 90s and early 2000s. It's more about specializing in your position. But obviously, Landon has taken that and run with it, and he's working all 3 phases, including special teams, as you point out. So, yeah, that's a great point. When you're the best, you don't have to do that, but he still is, and he's obviously flashing along the way, which is always nice.